got a glass of ice water. I have to get it myself.
We don't have water here.
No water. I'll drink some of that, right?
Also, put your phone back in the closet.
You'll be using that phone, Randy.
Oh,
You'll be using that phone.
to talk,
I'll
period?
put you on the phone off camera, and I'll be on the phone this camera while we're talking to this people.
Okay. I'm nervous.
There's headphones for you. There's phone headphones for you.
I need labels.
Oh, okay. This is for the other.
I'll just give, I'll give you the course list. He's on the phone. So you can,
H-Town hotties. Can only imagine.
blue. Blue. Leslie. Thank you.
Yours?
I did already.
Welcome everyone to Philosophy Live for Wednesday night, September, whatever it is.
12.
What's the date?
12.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Huh?
I can't hear anything.
It's not plugged in. Probably part of the problem. Oh no, it is plugged in. Let's try this. Can you guys hear us? We've had all kinds of technical problems as always trying to start the show, so please let us know if we sound fine. Oh, I do sound fine. So if she's gonna find, make sure the microphones are all on. They are.
They can, I can't hear you. Repeat.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, another technical problem, like always. No, it's every time. You really can't hear anything through the headphones? You're in the wrong thing.
Well, you didn't.
Okay, well that's why they're in the wrong thing. You know me. The topic tonight, as some of you probably already know, is Ayn Rand. I hate pronouncing her name correctly, but I've
have
been
to say it right.
informed that I have to pronounce her first name correctly or I'm going to get booted off the air. So the topic tonight is Ayn Rand, and the name of the show is The Final Authority. We've had actually some Rand authorities questioning the name of the show. In other words, wondering why we call it The Final Authority. So I'll talk about that for a little bit. Matter of fact, I'll take a note that I'm talking about that, because that is the name of the show. What we're really essentially doing is talking about Ayn Rand's ideas, talking about her thought, talking about how it's evolved into modern time. Then what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the Rand appointments, which is the Ayn Rand Institute professors that are working in large universities. We're going to talk a little about that issue because we'll talk specifically about Texas State, where you should be going.
Yeah, maybe one day.
You could probably use that microphone, and I can just use this one for now. You just need to pull it over to you. It'll make a bunch of noise when you pull it.
Yeah.
You just don't like it?
Well, I figure somebody's gonna sit right there.
Just get as close as possible and then rotate. Like you can try talking to it right now. That's perfect. We're going to talk about the Ayn Rand appointments at the universities and how that failed at Texas State. We're going to be talking to some people about her ideas and some criticisms of her ideas. And then from that, we'll probably segue into this final authority business, which is actually something I got from an essay called Who's the Final Authority in Ethics, which is a fundamental question for Rand about how people try to find authority in situations that seem to be a priority, that seem to be already determined by something that's not an authority issue, that's not a yes or no question. Nature, for instance. So the people on tonight's show, I'm Nick Jade. This is my co-host, Jackie O, as always, OH. The moderator is Marla Singer, like always here right on time and always loves being on the show and never has any questions about coming in.
Except that one day Jim's gonna get stabbed.
Except that apparently one day I'm going to get stabbed. I'm not sure why that would happen. Our moderator's always even keeled, likes the show, never has any problems with anything, right?
Yes, but one day that could change.
Not going to get stabbed for no reason?
And you may have to deal with the consequences of being stabbed.
How about the consequences of something else that caused me to get stabbed in the first place?
That too.
The people that know Marla Singer are probably eating this stuff up. Also, Dr. Tom Cooper is going to be in studio today. He is an expert on something. I actually don't know Dr. Tom Cooper
Philosophy.
because he's an underground conspiracy theory expert and also an expert on Ayn Rand. And we're going to have him on to talk about some of the questions he's had throughout his illustrious career dealing with objectivism and Randists. We will also have on the phone Andy Bernstein from the Ayn Rand Institute. I'll read specifically. He's a visiting professor of philosophy at Marist College. He's also the author of The Capitalist Manifesto, a big long subtitle, The Case for Laissez-Faire. You can also see or hear or read about Andrew Bernstein at andrewbernstein.net. You can go to that right now and he'll be on at 9 o'clock and you can have questions for him specific to Ayn Rand and her ideas. And capitalism. Capitalist Manifesto, the book that he wrote, is about defending capitalism, defending, from what I read, pure capitalism and the ideas behind capitalism against the kind of onslaught of relativism in those kinds of politics and economy discussions. Fear type more.
Oh my God, I mean, I just cannot handle you. I cannot handle
Fear
you.
type more. Is that,
I can't teach
fear
you how to
people-
read on the show.
You
I'm
can't-
sorry. I need to send you back to kindergarten.
You can't
Maybe.
fear people in the real world.
Oh, sure you can.
If you press fear, in the real world, nobody does anything. Only in WoW do they scatter around the room and go
How did
crazy.
you get an introduction?
I don't fear people.
I'm not done with the
Yeah,
introductions
she's
yet.
not done yet.
This is how it happens.
She's not done yet.
Hey, she doesn't have a microphone.
I don't fear people. She'll shut up me. I don't fear people. I use my psychic scream.
It's not fear with priests?
No.
Oh. I'm not going to get into a WoW discussion because you know what happens when we do that. We all send 8,000 viewers in the room. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the introductions for tonight's show. This is probably going to end up being a long show. But
No.
I don't know where my introduction list went. But I'm your host, Nick J. My co-host, Jackie O. Moderator, Marla Singer, who's always in a great mood. Our faithful commentator, Howard Rourke, who's demanding to be introduced. Dr. Tom Cooper will be in studio. And on the phone, Andy Bernstein. Andrew Bernstein from andrewbernstein.net. And there may be some surprise guests, but we're not quite sure yet if we can get the conference calling to work. I'm going to make you do the conference calling. No?
I have a question.
Okay. There they are again. Look, they just go on and on.
No, go ahead.
Good thing you know a microphone.
It's just a simple question. What exactly is the Ayn Rand Institute? What do they do?
That's a good question.
Do you want to answer that?
No. You explain it.
Why do I have to explain it?
You're
It's
the host.
Ayn Rand Institute is something that's evolved from when Ayn Rand was alive and in business. She was doing a lot of outreach. She was doing a lot of stuff to get her message out there, to get her ideas out there, to get the philosophy from her books out there. And she published a newsletter. I think it was that. Maybe it was called the Objectivist Center back then. Objectivist Center newsletter. But what ended up happening either way was she had a lot of these organizations, and she was really popular. You know, well, 50s and 60s. And what ended up happening from one group is, I think, kind of two groups branched out. Ayn Rand Institute and the Objectivist Center. I think that's right. And in some ways they have different agendas, whatever. They're both.
So it's just an organization of people.
That's a question
That
for
Is that really just all you were asking?
Yeah,
Right.
like, they're trying to push her ideas and
That's-
philosophy. Kind of like,
a good question would be what the difference between the two are for one of our experts.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Mhm.
Here, write that down. Oh yeah, I've got the question list. What's sad is I learn all this stuff and forget it. I'm on like the news. I'm on like the mailing list for both of them, and I get all these like.
so they
emails
just like
from them.
publish stuff and.
They both have newsletters, just like she did in her day. Like her book, one of her books, the most popular one, is actually a collection of the best articles from her newsletter. I'm writing notes right now. Difference between. Do what? Right, is he on the chat? Oh, someone call in. He could probably tell us. Difference between Ayn Rand Institute and Objectivist Center. I mean, it's my understanding that they've had their differences, if that answers your question.
And that's why they split apart.
Well, I don't know if that they split apart. It was probably that they, you know, that they, yeah, maybe some of the people that splintered off, you know, built this other, the Ayn Rand Institute. Ayn Rand Institute seems to be the bigger one. Seems to be the one that has more clout. That's the one that has these professors that are going to schools to try to get her ideas in there. which is one of the things we're talking about in the show.
But they teach it already in the schools.
No.
or Not at all.
That was really the problem. I mean, I can talk about my experience, that I can go
Yeah,
sit in the
And
black chair if you
we'll
want.
also be
because-
asking Dr. Bernstein a lot of these questions
Yeah.
as well.
Well, when I was teaching at Texas State, what happened was I had read a lot of Ayn Rand, but I hadn't really understood her in the context of philosophy. So as I was learning more about it, I was also reading about Ayn Rand, and there was actually 2 students who started an Ayn Rand group. But there's Ayn Rand groups in every school, like grassroots groups. And so I went to the professors and kind of said, how can we never hear about Ayn Rand in the curriculum at all, even if it's just an essay? And as a rule, she just wasn't taken seriously. And that should be the question you have when you hear so many people talking about how great she is. You see that?
I was trying to tell you,
That's
but you
awesome.
can't read, so.
I can't read. What was I just saying?
Exactly.
Oh, for the love.
Come on, Howard. What was I saying?
But
She wasn't taken
you're
seriously.
She wasn't taken seriously in the
Right.
sense that most of the philosophers I encountered, which is not what I get from the people I talk to now that are, professors or teachers or people that are pro-Rand, I get, how can you possibly doubt anything she believes, is kind of the feedback I get. But when I was in that department, there were some great people there, and they were kind of like either ignorant of some of the stuff or kind of not satisfied with, they might have said how one-sided her philosophy was, how not open to criticism it was, or how dogmatic it seemed. And, there's a lot of critics that say she's dogmatic and leave it at that, or make weak arguments or something. So she wasn't taken seriously in the department. So what ended up happening was, I thought it was a great way to access philosophy, regardless of what I believed. I thought the fact that so much of it was fiction, the fact of her being such a clear writer about what she did believe, the fact that she was engaging in a lot of ways, and in some ways controversial, made me think these students are going to latch on to it the way these groups do. AC just did it again. We want to make a big sign and just say, do all these things before the show goes live. I want to miss turn that damn
Need a
AC off.
checklist.
Careful, you're gonna lose your train of thought.
Valiant wants to know what knowledgeable critics you're talking about.
Yeah, no, I'm not citing anybody right now. What I'm talking about is the kind of general critique that I get when I read an article about her that's not always favorable, which, there are always articles, I just don't have them in front of me. And then when I talk to these professors, we had a visiting professor from China, my volume? We had a visiting professor from China who was a really good friend of mine, and of course I'm paraphrasing.
I forgot about him.
That was your favorite teacher.
I loved him.
Yeah, and I'm paraphrasing, but he didn't find her complex enough, and that's really going to end up being my question. Is even though I considered myself very, very pro-Rand at the time, and I'm still pro a lot of the things that she said and did. One of my questions is going to be how extensive her ideas are in philosophy, in the sense that, to me, some of her ideas are ideas that most people already have. And I don't know how she would respond to this. And it almost goes back to Socrates in the sense that it's almost like this relationship with objective reality and with your life being a priority. And then ultimately, the fact that you have to see priorities existing.
Why is that on?
Huh? I don't know what that thing's doing, but you're supposed to answer the cordless, I don't know what it is. Now I don't know where it was again. It takes 1 second and I'm offline. Mentally.
Play Socrates.
Oh, he just couldn't wait to get on. He's like, I'm not gonna let this guy.
Done.
Yeah.
Hold on.
I'm guessing I have to answer the phone.
James Valiant can't stand listening to it, so he's got to get on and say something.
Well, it's great. I can clarify some things. Brandon, you want to pick up the phone? Hey, James, are you there? Great. I'm hoping this is working. Is it picking up the phone fine?
I can't hear still.
What do you mean you can't hear?
I can't hear still.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. I'm just trying to make sure the moderator can hear you through the headphones because we're having a bunch of problems.
No, you need to plug it back in. Makes it turn the volume. Oh, there we go.
But tying the idea of ethics to science is. Right. Right. I think some of the philosophers, and maybe you can help me with this, but I think some of the philosophers I talked to, some of the professors were making the case that what she says is already kind of something accepted by philosophers. Like, even though they might contradict themselves. Yeah, I used to like Nagel. Right. I mean, I don't disagree with you about that. Right, but there are people that don't play that game. Right? What would you say about somebody like Sigmund Freud? Okay. That's great. Right. Now I know you are. let me just throw out, right, let me just throw out this idea though. I guess not. Right, but what about this idea that I have? I mean, I lost the Sigmund Freud thread, but whoa, did that can you still hear me, James? Wow, that just created the weirdest echo. Anyway, what about this idea? What about this idea that what actually happened was that, now we know that historical philosophy is full of these problems that Ayn Rand talked about, and this kind of subjective take on philosophy, and these kinds of leaps that we find with almost every philosopher, I think. But what about this idea that, but what we have is a kind of, when you look at objectivism as a philosophy and as a system, what you find is something that people, that comes built into humans, even though I agree with her that it needs to be practiced. But what needs to be addressed by philosophy, and what often is, and it isn't addressed very successfully, is this idea that there's some other thing that's part of the human brain that makes this human brain not see these very simple, very obvious things. And it's that part of nature that can't just be dismissed. And it's that part of nature. If what was possible? I'm not saying knowledge is impossible. That's not what I'm saying. Right. Well, I'm not saying they can't get in touch with it. Right.
Just launch in to say, what are your criticisms of Rand?
Right. Oh yeah. Right. Let me ask you one last thing. Right. I got rid of that echo. Right. Let me ask you one more thing because I don't have a whole bunch of time. But something we were interested in after the last conversation, we took a lot of notes because you had a lot of interesting things to say, and it was that in your book you wrote a book, of course, about the critics of Ayn Rand, the passion of Ayn Rand's critics. And but did you find anything successful? Did you find? Right. Right. So you took on people that had something to say. Oh, yeah. Oh.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a lot about that today in preparation for the show. Those kinds of, we ran into a lot of those kinds of criticisms. Right. And in a lot of ways, those are ad hominem, right? That's what we were talking about. But you didn't find other critics? Right.
I want to know what he personally, his critiques
Right.
of her.
Well, right. But what are the good critiques? Like, what are the critiques you found that weren't of the ad hominem variety and weren't of this kind of ignorance is bliss or whatever? You're saying you didn't find any. No, but that's what I'm saying. In your research, have you found any with substance separate from anything that we've said? But isn't that part of... Right. Right.
What are his criticisms? List off
Right.
3 criticisms.
I totally hear you. Well, Do you have any criticisms of her? It's making itself inherent in another form. Right. So you don't have any personal criticism. But you've looked at both sides. You've looked at both sides and you don't have anything that you could say. Like if you were being Freud and wanted to have your own. Right. 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 Yeah. That makes perfect sense. I do have to let you go though because it's 8:30 and we've got to get our in-studio guest on. But I want to thank you a lot for calling in and helping us out again and getting us going that direction. So feel free to stay on the chat if you have questions for us too, if you have anything else. Thanks for calling, James. Bye.
Holy shit.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that later. The first thing we want to do is bring on our in-studio guest. Howard is having an allergic reaction to something she ate, and she fell out of the chair. So we'll try to get Howard. Is my volume back fine? Because we had all kinds of weird problems.
Turn it back on.
Well, I turned it
Oh, well, there you go.
It was so static.
Right, it's causing too much static. But you know, right when we turned it off, we got this weird echo. I don't know if it was God trying to tell us something about the Ayn Rand show or Ayn Rand show, but it had this weird like echo. Did you hear that thing? Like we were in like a bucket.
Yes, but you said God.
That's like saying the word heart.
Yes.
You know, he didn't get to hear the phone conversation.
I know.
That's good, that's good.
No, but it would have riled him up if he'd heard the phone
Yeah.
conversation.
Well, let's give him some high points.
Yeah. So
Can we get over there?
So let's get him on. First, we're going to have our guest, Dr. Tom Cooper from somewhere. Try. Thanks for coming on the show. Try to talk about 6 inches away from the microphone without touching it.
Okay.
If you ever touch it, like she just did, it ruins the audio quality. But it's great to have you here. I know you got
Pleasure
some.
to be here.
I know you got some great things to say, and I know Jackie O is spellbound by the same food poisoning that Howard did. You guys won't be able to say anything for the next 15 minutes. But do you want to do some high points, note taker? Because you didn't get to hear the you didn't get to hear the phone conversation.
I
So we
didn't
couldn't have our studio audio on. The person you let me give you some background. Do you have information on James Valiant?
No, but
James Valiant is the author of a book called The Passion of Ayn Rand's Critics, where he discusses, it sounds like from his own, what he said, the arguments that seem to be geared around ad hominem, which is to say, Ayn Rand is doing something wrong in her life, you can't say that and have that reflect in her philosophy. That's something we found a lot of those criticisms where people were saying, well, she had these problems with the affair that she had problems with her affair having an affair, and she had some emotional reactions to that. We've also found a lot of stuff we're going to discuss later about some of her problems with science and her own lung cancer and the fact that she smoked. And I think they focused on these things as irrational or as
Yeah, she's
overly
not really
emotional.
living up to what she's saying.
But that's
Calm down now, you can't say anything bad about Ayn Rand. What are you thinking? Okay, I'm going to give us both this microphone. I know I'm messing up the audio. But the point is that a lot of the arguments we found were ad hominem. So we were looking for arguments that were more about, and what James Valiant was saying on the phone was that he's never found a cogent argument against Ayn Rand's philosophy, and more than she's dogmatic or she's
or her
not
ideas
complete.
are overly simplistic.
Her ideas are
or-
overly simplistic. He's heard
Or
statements,
regurgitation of other philosophical
regurgitated,
ideas.
or a reaction against
Right.
other philosophies and not enough of a positive philosophy. I think you've heard all those things, right? I've heard them for those philosophy professors, and he said, yes, I've heard those things too, and I actually ignored those for my book. But our other question was, well, what have you heard that our because what he meant was, who's saying something specific to her ideas, to her philosophy,
Who can both get her ideas correct and.
and then refute them.
Yeah, right.
You know, have
and
something to say about that.
make an intelligent argument or an intelligent.
So the first thing is jump in right there, you know, if you have anything.
Alright, well, I'm going to start off actually by doing something that you just said I shouldn't do. I'm actually going to talk about how Ayn Rand's philosophy borrowed heavily from existentialism, Nietzschean existentialism.
I'm with you on that one.
The idea
Make
that
another phone call probably, but.
the idea that you should live your life to make yourself happy and that your morals should be determined based on the way that you think things are going to be good and bad falls heavily into the master-slave doctrine that you found in Thus Spake Zarathustra, right? The master is someone who says, I will do this because it is good for me, or I will do this because it is bad and it harms me. Whereas the slave is somebody who adheres to dogma, says this is good or evil, so that something is inherently wrong with an action and can never be good. And then Ayn Rand goes on to talk about Kant, and talk about Hume, and talk about how Kant and Hume are the evil that fights our society. They went on to attempt...
More Kant than Hume, it sounds like.
More Kant than Hume, but she
Right.
tends to, even though they're opposing philosophies, she seems to tend to put them together, to lump them as the two problems that are wrong with our more moralistic viewpoints. So the idea that Kant is evil, simply by saying that, she's falling into the slave mentality, which is the opposite of where her philosophy draws its parallels. You know, it's and even she said, if she had it her way, she would have named her philosophy existentialism, but it was taken. So she can't say that I didn't know existentialism was around, or I don't know the teachings of existentialism, and I don't think Ayn Rand was unintelligent. So the idea that she thought that this was good, and that this was something that made sense to her, and she could expose upon it, and add something to it, and make it her own, because she really did very well. She did a very good job of creating new ideas, and that's the idea of philosophy, right?
Right.
But the idea that she would go about doing that and then continue on the same vein, name calling basically against Kant is just, it's ludicrous. You know?
Right. Well, she did it to everyone, basically. If you've ever read that essay, she went and lambasted the whole schools of I mean, not that I didn't do the same thing as a philosophy teacher. I would go through volumes and volumes and essays and just go, what are all these people talking about? And that's what actually attracted me to Rand in the first place, was it was kind of bereft of any kind of sense. I mean, it was just this crazy desire-based logic. Like, I want to find this answer, I want to prove God, or I want to be happy, therefore I'm going to make up my philosophy and we're defining that stuff. So I was just confused about how nobody was having any kind of common sense. And then I countered pragmatists and utilitarians, who are other groups that Rand lambasted in the essay, obviously, as relativists. And of course I had problems with them in some of the same ways she did, but I think my experience that ultimately made me think, well, I want to explore Rand from a bunch of different angles. I think, which is to say, as Freud would say, look at her as her best, as her biggest fan and as her biggest critic. I mean, what Freud was basically saying, which what I wanted to say of Valiance, is that somebody like Freud is a philosopher who stood up and did these things without having these kinds of philosophical breakdowns. Who said this is, and I think Freud assumed some of the things that she says without having to articulate them, and then really came down with his science, on the side of science, on the side of the same kinds of things, but took human nature into maybe a more complex, as a more complex understanding. So, I mean, I don't know what you have to say about that, and Valiant's point was, and we actually talked about this last show, was that Rand was the opposite of Nietzsche, is what he just said in chat. Mm-hmm. And I think what he said when we talked to him last time was that in the beginning she was really attracted to Nietzsche's ideas, that she grew up with someone, and one of her friends showed her a Nietzsche book and said, this guy's done and said everything you've already said.
Yeah.
And so she picked it up and she loved him for a while. And almost in response to what you said, it did seem like she had a reaction against Nietzsche that, in my mind, wasn't purely rational and logical. It wasn't just because she believed he was a beast, or that believed he was a bulldozer, or believed that he was unsystematic, or believed, as Valiant ended up saying, that he was a subjectivist in a way. it seemed when I was reading her that she did agree with a lot of what he said, and there was some other motive for her saying, I'm going to lump him into this group.
Mhm.
You know, and the only person she didn't lump into that group really is Aristotle. And, you know, and she really goes against Socrates, and I never, just like Valiant said, who are the people that are really making cogent arguments against Rand? And I was always wondering with Rand, where's Rand's cogent argument against Socrates? And I'm sure we're going to get a bunch of calls or chats about that one.
Well, did she like claim to be purely an objectivist? I mean, was that like her thing? I mean, because I think everybody has to have some kind of subjective.
You know, I don't actually know whether she claimed to be an objectivist. Just it seems that generally when a philosopher creates a philosophy, they tend to attempt.
Well, I think she said it. I mean, that was what she said. She said the best word for my philosophy is objectivism. I'm not sure that she said I'm trying to start a philosophy named objectivism. But what she said was that it was the best name for it, and that what she, you know, I mean, what does objectivism really mean? You would have to sit there and do that. And of course, are we getting great chat questions? Is that what this means? I knew that's what I knew he was going to say yes, you do. I knew I said it the wrong way. So, really, the question is, and this is the question I wanted to ask. The question is, if her ideas, I agree with Valiant in the sense that sometimes some of the best philosophy ideas are the most simple, and it's almost like I was wondering why they had to be, you know, so misunderstood if they were so simple. And I had the same experience with Rand, I guess, that she had with Nietzsche in the sense that when I read Rand, even though I found a lot of the stuff in Nietzsche, who I actually like better, and when I was reading Rand, I didn't learn anything, but I really enjoyed her clarity.
Mm-hmm.
I said to myself, I mean, in the sense that I thought I was different from everyone already, I said to myself, I already know all this stuff. This stuff is obvious to me. And I agree with her that it doesn't seem to be obvious to other people. But what I thought was important for philosophy was to explore why other people didn't understand this. And then when I talked to pragmatists and utilitarians, that was their position. Their position was, what are we doing if all we're doing is saying this is objective reality to people who damn well know it's objective reality and en masse aren't understanding it, if that makes sense. So their lives, their behaviors, their productions are clearly a product of them missing these simple ideas that don't have to be a part of a philosophical movement necessarily. And maybe and that's what I was trying to tell him, maybe that's what I found in some of the philosophers I liked better, was that they didn't feel like they had to really go to work laying this out, even though the point today is this work really needs to be done because there's so many subjectivists, right?
Or relativists, depending
Or
on what it
relativists,
is.
right.
But okay, well, let's talk about Rand and the Solipsists, right? The idea that reality, it's a very, you know, it's very based on Kant. You know, the idea that reality only exists because of my mind and everything that I see and perceive is a part of reality.
That's this one.
Yeah. And then you add the Kantian philosophy that, you know, since I'm perceiving reality and it has to be filtered through my perceptions, I couldn't possibly be objective. You look at Rand and she says, I must be objective because I am the one perceiving reality and it is my reality. But at the same time that the Solipsists are borrowing from Kant, and Rand is sort of affirming that Solipsist idea, but then lumping the Solipsists in the same big category of people who either don't agree with me, you know, that sort of thing. And so when you're looking at that as an argument, how do you reconcile the two? How do you reconcile the idea that the Solipsists can both agree with Rand and with Kant when they so obviously don't get along?
Maybe they're just morons.
Explanation for everything.
You're talking about the solipsists?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, Henry Rollins actually wrote a book called Solipsism. Did you read that?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know there really were solipsists, though.
I was one for a long time, actually, to be fair.
So you're taking the literal definition of the word solipsism
Yeah,
then?
and it's kind of like, you know, people have talk about how man created their own God. When you're a solipsist, you don't have to create your own God because you are your own God because there's
Right.
no, you know,
There's no
nobody
external
else.
reality.
You're the only thing that exists.
Right. And you know, the point of Valiant's emphasis on understanding Rand's ideas as they are and in context is that, and I agree with them on this one again too, I agree with certainly the objectivists on this, is that, and this is why her and I are always arguing about it off camera, is that solipsistic approach seems to be the thing that allows people then to kind of defy fairly easy to understand and simple ethics in such a way that we can see such bad behavior over and over again when it really does do a disservice to the very people that you know that it should matter the most to. I mean, people obviously destroy their own countries and their own lives and their own, their own time. The whole centuries have been destroyed by these kinds of failures to explore what is outside of, the solipsistic. I mean, you said you're not a solipsist anymore, so you
Well,
must have had the same experience.
They're not mutually exclusive. Just because reality only exists inside your mind doesn't
Well, again.
necessarily mean that you can't explore that reality. Obviously, it's much more complex than you understand, maybe cognitively.
Right.
You would have to understand it all subconsciously. So delving into the world is in a way just a way to understand yourself from the solipsistic perspective. But, I don't know.
Right. So, are there any more questions? Oh God, you have a whole page of questions.
No questions. It's all about
Okay, one of Van's questions that interests me is that there's no need for the subjective ever, which is an interesting take because in some ways sometimes I agree with that. So her vehement position is that the subjective is natural, it's not something you can get rid of, it's inherent, it's valuable in the sense that it produces experiences that you have to have. Is this
I
right
mean,
so
it
far?
makes individuals. That's what makes you an individual. If everything was objective to me, it would just be this huge lumped together thing.
Everyone would be the same.
Like robots.
Yeah, I mean,
But I mean,
I don't know what else to
Which-
say about it, but.
What would be an ironic outcome from that sort of thing? Because, in Anthem, the idea was that they were getting rid of the individual and this was the bad thing. So if subjectivism made the individual, then to do away with it in favor of objectivism, in the view of the greater universe as a whole, would be completely against
Yeah,
what
do
Grant
something.
wanted.
is there caller ID working?
It says unknown.
Okay, well let's get back to the main topic of the show though, and then you can address this because my question about this whole business is that, and as much as I like James Valiant, he kind of confused me further in this regard, and that is that as an individual, whatever is the mix, whatever
Turn the phone
on
down.
again. It's probably these idiots that call over and over again. Again. I've got call block on the phone, we need to figure out how to use it. Let me try to get back on my train of thought, it's so difficult.
Anyway,
We're
so
trying
if
to-
it confused you even more that Valiant said, that's where you were going.
I know, where was I? I don't even know where I was.
He said,
Oh, this thing about philosophy being an exploration of two sides of an idea. Like, and this is what Howard was getting at. At the point where people are almost saying there's no cogent argument against her, and these people are intelligent, they're educated, they've explored things, they've researched.
that's
I mean-
like religion to me.
I know, that's what I was thinking.
And these two are all worried about this whole Rand movement in general being religious. These guys are both smart people, so I'm thinking, how many people are having this problem? And since I like Ayn Rand, I want to respond to it, and I haven't.
What I want to know is how is a philosophy supposed to evolve if those who are most knowledgeable about her philosophy, someone like Valiant who actually knows her philosophy in and out, if they can't even generate any kind of criticism? I mean, even though Rand said that she wasn't the final, she didn't have the final word on philosophy, that this was it. She'd written the book and she was done.
She also said something the opposite of that too.
Well, but I mean,
Let's
those
not take it out of
that know the most about her philosophy can't even come up with some kind of criticism. I mean, what hope is there that a knowledgeable criticism will ever, come about?
Well, man, isn't that the essence of philosophy? I mean, you know philosophy, you've been working with this for 10s, 20s, 30s years. So, I mean, doesn't it make sense to say that, as Freud said, like when I'm exploring these ideas, one of the first things I do to strengthen my argument, which was my case to you about something, fairly recently, is that to make myself my best critic and to make myself understand the critics of the ideas that I
Right.
value the highest. And in Future and Illusion, when he was attacking Christianity, his point was, this is what the Christians are going to say, and this is what my invisible critic, has as his best argument against this particular thesis, in this particular chapter, in this particular idea. And, ever since I've gotten back into this objectivist thing, I've seen this lack of this kind of, it's not just the lack of criticism, it's not just, there isn't a cogent argument, it's the lack of desire for it,
Right.
It's the lack of a kind of position where that's a valuable thing, that's something that makes philosophy. It's almost like, and that's why this show is called The Final Authority, because, and I agree with Rand on a lot of these points, that people set up these impossible questions by saying, for instance, who's the final authority in ethics, as if people get to decide, when I do think that nature determines a lot of things, or that reality determines a lot of things, whatever you want to call it. But at the same time, to take that to an extreme or to ignore elements of that in a dialectic seems to me not be a process of philosophy.
Yeah, philosophy is reactionary. You know, Hume, Kant, Nietzsche, you continue on down the line, and every philosopher is attempting to disprove what someone else said. They look at it and they say, well, this is okay, but this isn't what I believe. So they continue and they move on and they make something else. And philosophy is, in its own way, a belief structure, just as religion would be. You're searching for truth, not for fact. If you want fact, you go to science. That's a completely separate thing.
Right.
If you're looking for truth, you go to philosophy. But the idea that she was searching for the ultimate truth and wow, she found it, is just, it's ludicrous. It makes no sense. The idea that you could say with a straight face that there is no valid argument against her philosophy means that it must be, she wouldn't be the first fiction writer that became dogmatic.
Right.
I'm not comparing her to L. Ron Hubbard, but I am saying that there is a scent of religion in the idea that you cannot be argued with.
Right. Well, I mean, in her favor, my point was that she served a utilitarian purpose.
Okay.
And this is, do we have the quote from Dr. Louisi? Or because we lost Firefox, we don't have it. The chair of Texas State University, who was the person most involved in the appointment of the Rand professor at Texas State, and then he actually wanted them to come in, but they were rejected by the university by a kind of quorum or whatever it was. His point was that her philosophical fiction, the clarity of her writing, the way she consistently kept with this particular position, makes her extremely accessible to those that are interested in philosophy. And to him, that was the greatest value. So you don't hear these things from, say, Dr. Louisi, who's impartial in the sense that he's not in the objectivist center, or he's not convinced of her infallibility, even though that's not what people would say. That's what it sounds like to some of her critics. Louisi's very impartial, and I know Dr. Louisi, and he is, of all the impartial people, the most impartial. He's a judge, as a matter of fact. And it's interesting to listen to the way he picks out the things and says, this is what, because ultimately what he's saying is this is what we should be talking about, right? What we should be talking about with Rand is how her ideas can be communicated and how accessible they are and how clear they are, and then if they're not clear, we talk about that. But I think the focus is taken away from the fact that there's some ultimate truth here in a way that is not taken away from some other ideas, even maybe though it should be. So I guess what I'm saying is that when I was very attracted to her back when I was teaching, it was for those reasons, and I didn't realize it. And it's almost now in the twilight of my Rand career that that I found out she smoked 2 packs a day. But apparently that's ad hominem, and and the whole thing, Freud doesn't know what he's talking about because he smoked cocaine.
Only if smoking hurts you.
I mean, but the thing is, one's ad hominem and one's kind of not. And I know everyone's going to be mad at me for this, but, in Freud's day, cocaine was different. It wasn't something that it is today, which is to say, I know what people are thinking that do cocaine today. There's some element of their brain that I understand. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What do you mean it was different?
It wasn't illegal, and it wasn't cocaine, and it was, and it was accepted, and it was for the same reason I drink Diet Coke. Like, and the bastard hadn't stayed up 22 hours a day, we wouldn't have some of the things from him that we have.
I was going to say, one of the differences that I sort of feel like is different from Rand's philosophy and, say, other philosophy is that she's almost giving you a workable philosophy, like a philosophy that if you follow in your daily life, that you should be able to achieve some sort of happiness or success or whatever, or live a principled life. I mean, there's a difference.
And I agree with her with most of this stuff, too.
There's a difference when you're saying that I'm creating a philosophy for you to live by, basically, and I'm just creating, I'm just philosophizing, so to speak. And I think that's where you can run into trouble, is if you're saying, and why attacks on her personally are, and to some extent, valid, because she's saying, look, use my philosophy in your daily life, and good things will happen.
Well, it's the
And-
fundamental for your daily life, is what she's saying.
And when I think she opens herself up to those types of criticism.
Right, but of course, what Valiant's going to say is that there's some element of ad hominem here because the person who's saying the philosophy and the philosophy itself is, if you look at critical thinking, separate. So, but you would have to preface it by
That's
saying,
why I'm saying that the difference is she's saying that. I mean, I'm not
right,
saying negate all of her
but
philosophy.
what Valiant could say is that Rand didn't follow her own philosophy perfectly, and it still doesn't negate her philosophy as successful. I mean, that would be the argument that they would make.
Right.
Clearly, she didn't understand her philosophy or didn't. And that's another point, though. That's a whole other issue. Is if it's so marketable and so infallible, how come she didn't buy into it? Because
Right.
in a sense, you're smoking two back today. Your doctor tells you have a tumor, and you make up some. I don't know the whole story, and I'm sure there's someone else who knows more that's going to say she was in the wrong state of mind when she did that. But I think you see a series of things that occurred in her life where you can find no other conclusion other than that she didn't really buy into this as a whole system, or it didn't work for her as a whole system, and that she
Right.
didn't lead a happy life. And the only argument that I could think against what I just said, and I'm bringing in my own best critic, is the same argument I make, is that the only unhappiness she got was a product of everyone else being irrational and subjective, and that's the argument I make, because I think I'm perfect.
One of our viewers actually had an interesting point, so I guess get everyone's take on this.
You like that?
The problem is that Rand's philosophy is attractive to those looking to rationalize destructive behavior.
Can we say it again, so we all
Right,
hear
because
it?
you weren't listening,
I was listening perfectly, my earball got clogged.
because you were talking. The problem is that Rand's philosophy is attractive to those looking to rationalize destructive behavior.
Her philosophy is attractive to him?
Mm-hmm.
What does he
Well,
mean?
she
Certainly not
Something on the,
self-destructive
that she rationalized her smoking.
She
and
rationalized
tumor.
her own self-destruction.
Right, but what Valiant would say is that her rationalizing her smoking came from another place.
I mean, it seems
And
like
it doesn't have to be attached to her
I'm not
philosophy.
saying that those arguments, these supposed arguments that you think that Valiant would say, are invalid. That she didn't understand her own philosophy, or that she didn't apply her own philosophy to her own life. But it just seems like these arguments are really slippery slope to kind of
Right.
use because you can use those arguments no matter what someone says. Either A, you don't understand her philosophy, B, you can't attack her, because she didn't understand her own philosophy, or she chose not to apply her own philosophy to her life. I mean,
Well, the
It's
obvious
like-
question, right, it's an obvious
where do you
question.
go from there? I mean,
Well, it's an obvious question that if it's infallible, she would have used it.
right.
And if it leads to this life and she's the one that best understood it, then she would have the results from that best life. And
Right.
obviously she didn't. I mean, her life sounds miserable to me.
Right. We have other people that are saying it's not necessarily destructive, but it's selfish. So I'm quite sure you have something to say about that.
Oh, well, then those people just don't understand the philosophy. I mean, that's a great criticism. I wish those people were on the show because it's a very common criticism. But the fact is, Nietzsche's philosophy, in my mind, better articulates this idea, right? And there's other people that articulate this idea. And the way to look at it is really actually fairly simple, like if we're talking about simple things. And it is that selfish doesn't mean that I harm other people by my dereliction of my communal responsibilities. What selfish means is that I hold myself and my self-interest as a highest value. And as Ayn Rand said herself, often you find that what is in your best interest is to do things for others. If you're your prime motivating factor, what is best in enhancing this quality of life is by not lying to other people, by helping other people, not giving money to homeless people in my end, but by funny. But by doing all of these things
Okay,
that we would then call selfless.
Internet Explorer just.
What the?
It's
Are
not
you
even on there.
serious?
Mhm.
No, it's right there on the bar. It's just doing what my computer does.
Everything is shut down.
So typical.
So we just
I'll bring it
leave
up
on.
and you can.
Huh?
So does it stop working?
It's just so typical.
Can they see us?
No, it should,
when it was
everything would
on,
be
both
down.
windows just.
It'll pop back up and everyone's gonna have to get back on again.
Yeah, we were featured too, so there's.
Oh.
And we just lost our count.
We're back.
The cord's off too, it looks like. I know you guys aren't back in the room yet, so I'm gonna be a solipsist, talk to myself. Do you guys have to go or?
Pretty soon.
But we'll call him in about 2 minutes, and then maybe we get on the line and get out of here unless you want to listen to him.
No, I think I'll be okay.
Yeah.
You'll have a recording, I can watch that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know Andrew Bernstein, but I'm guessing he's going to be fairly similar to James Valiant.
I didn't
They
hear
just
you.
sound
And unfortunately, you didn't hear
so forceful about this being the only way
Well,
philosophy
I
should
think-
be. It's just
If you get just deeper into Rand's ideas, though, the point is in some way synonymous with Aristotle's that some things don't have competition in the realm of ideas. Like, if you looked at it abstractly, you said whatever the answer to this question is going to be.
but that's just
If you
like a-
structure
There's
the
an answer to the question.
Well, if I ever do answer this correctly, it's going to be a priori. I mean, maybe if you're a real philosopher, you go, I'm not saying I'm going to answer it correctly, but I mean, human nature has to be a thing. It can't be, opposing things at the same time, just like you can't have a God and no God at the same time. I mean, there is some common sense logic approach to some of these deeper ideas, which would suggest that if you found the answer, they would be fairly objective. You're looking at me like a crazy person because you love the word subjective.
I don't love the word subjective. I just think that it happens.
Subjectivity happens.
Subjectivity.
You get a bumper sticker that says subjectivity happens. Hey, I'd like to recap the show really quick. Isn't that a great idea? Because we lost our feed because Internet Explorer exploded or something. It's just like the 7th problem we've had today, like always. But doing it on the internet like this, we have to understand that, and there's subjective forces at work and aliens. So, what's Liv's name? Because he's kind of an alien.
He's just the Jew, but everybody got mad.
The Jew. The Jew Lib is one of the aliens, actually. And what he does is he casts spells on our equipment. And
Wow,
that's what causes these problems.
that's pretty intense.
But it also leads to a kind of more complex, more chaotic interpretation of reality in such a way that Rand's ideas aren't going to help us go very
Certainly
far.
not when the Internet Explorer goes
Go
down.
far, go too far into that. So tonight's show is about Ayn Rand. It's called Ayn Rand, the Final Authority. We're bringing on some people. Most of the people that are calling in are scholars and professors and
Doctor.
well, no, I'm saying people calling in. Well, they're doctors too. They are people who are very sold on this idea that Rand's ideas could greatly help everything, including the general understanding of philosophy, which is problematic at best right now in our culture. And I worked in a philosophy department, and there was a lot of relativism, and there were a lot of problems, and there was a lot of people talking to just talk and not a lot of answers. So I think it's important what they're saying, but we're going to bring on those ideas, and then we're trying to get people on the other side that have something to say about both whether she's dogmatic, whether you can make ad hominem critiques, whether her philosophy is really philosophy in the sense that it explores ideas from both sides, it maintains dialectic, it understands that truth is extremely complex. So we're trying to get both people, and so we talked to James Valiant on the phone, who's very pro-Rand, and he told us a lot of specifics about her ideas, her life. And we're going to have Dr. Andrew Bernstein on right away. So you can go ahead and call him. I'm the sponsor for tonight's show is superfishstore.com for all your pet needs. Go to superfishstore.com where the customer is always wrong. I'm Nick J, your host. This is whatever your name is. I always want to call you Sandra.
Tom.
Why
No,
would
her.
Sandra?
Jackie.
Her.
Jackie O?
I know, where's my list now though? I don't get where these things go. Should go down the
Oh, I
other
don't
side.
remember your name.
This is my co-host Jackie O. This was our in-studio guest, Dr. Tom Cooper. We have as our moderator, of course, Marla Singer, who's actually getting our guest right now. Our commentator, as always, Dr. Howard Rourke, who's been somewhat quiet tonight. And then our upcoming guest, if we can get him on the phone, is Dr. Andrew Bernstein, the author of wherever his book went, The Capitalist Manifesto: The Case for Laissez-Faire.
Can I just say that, I mean, this is something we all basically agree on, but are Ayn Rand's ideas about how to live ideals that even she wasn't able to live up to? And if so, if she wasn't able to live up to them, doesn't that make criticism available to her ideas?
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, in my opinion, I kind of buy into her ideals, and I find myself living up to them. So it's hard for me to say that people can't live up to them. At the same time,
Do I have to make an ad hominem?
dude, make ad hominems all you want. No, I'm not a person that hates criticism. I mean, Ayn Rand said, I'm done discussing at some
Yeah.
point, which means I'm done with people that don't agree with me, and that's a fact that she said
Right,
that.
and
I'm worried about.
Were you doing this because you wanted to talk? It's
Yeah.
so funny.
I'm worried about
Really?
not being able to hear.
Oh, when Andy Bernstein calls.
Yeah.
Well, I think you should be worried because you're not going to be able to hear it because all of our earphones are out all of a sudden. Like the brand new expensive earphones aren't working.
Those aren't working. I thought they were.
Well, I mean, according to whatever the
no, they're
moderator's
working
name is.
now because you put them in the right.
No, she said they weren't working. I'll try to fiddle with them. Oh, he's on the phone.
Yeah, turn the volume up.
On the thing, right.
Everything's working. Yeah, I
What
need
is
to
that?
listen to them. I need to listen to the volume.
We just need another phone. Andrew, are you there? I'm gonna go ahead and put you on air right now. We've been having all kinds of technical difficulties like always, so you'll have to maybe bear with us as we try to figure them out. Yeah. Okay, so we're looking good right now, except for our co-host can't get her earphone to work, so she's not gonna be able to participate, but we should have a couple people able to chime in on the discussion. And to bring you up to speed, James Valiant did actually call, you know James Valiant, right? Yeah. He called in and we actually had him on the show about a week ago and did, talked to him at length. And he called in today just to straighten us out. So we did have him on for about 20 minutes and got to talk to him, which was always great. We've been talking about Ayn Rand's ideas, and we've been trying to explore this idea that any of her critics have anything substantive to say. So that's kind of been, especially in relation to his book. And so that's kind of been the direction we're going. The name of the show is The Final Authority because I wanted to explore this idea that she said that things, in a sense, can't be looked at in terms of having an authority when it's a thing that's a priori or natural or a component of objective reality in the sense that it just is. So that's kind of where we're coming from, and I guess we'll be pulling you in right in the middle of it. But the first question I had actually was more specific to what's going on, and one of those is that we had a lot of viewers asking us the difference between the Ayn Rand Institute and the Objectivist Center. Do you know the difference between that? It's a totally separate institution, right? It's a totally separate institution, though, I guess was my question. It's totally separate. And what is the one that's more closely related to what Ayn Rand was actually doing when she was back doing, her newsletters and... So tell us a little bit about what you do specifically, just so we get an idea. Okay. Yeah, it sounds like that would. I wasn't even able to do one of them successfully without running out of time. I wasn't able to do one of them successfully without running out of time. Okay, so I've always wanted actually to do radio, and I wouldn't call myself a celebrity yet, but I have kind of put my own like built my own system around me so that I could actually have somewhat of a radio show, but actually it's turned into more of a battle with web technology show. Yeah. So anyway, let's get to some of these ideas. I guess our first question for James Valiant was that as we explored Ayn Rand, we did find a lot of these ad hominem critiques of her as a person. And as a philosophy teacher, I know that isn't the most convincing, and as someone who loves Freud, I didn't really, at all warm up to those kinds of critiques right away. In retrospect, there are some that I guess I paid more attention to. But what we were looking for is some kind of real critique, some kind of academic critique. Because what I found when I was teaching was that they sure had, implicit critiques, right? And when I taught her in the classroom, and when I taught some of these basic ideas, and when I taught the Attila versus the producer, and when I taught some of these ideas that were certainly accessible to all these students, and very interesting, like the definition of selfishness and the misconceptions regarding it. When I taught this, I found it was very accessible, and when I went to professors and teachers and people that I respected, I found that they either hadn't read her, or they had read some stuff and had been immediately turned off by these, more conventional, less articulated critiques, like that she's dogmatic, or that she doesn't fully, explore things philosophically, or then they would degenerate into ad hominem arguments. So what we were looking for is both, of course, obvious things like what attracts you to philosophy and what is a link between ethics and science and these kinds of things, but also what are the critiques of those things? What are the critiques that people would pay attention to rather than dismiss if we have such a problem, spreading these ideas right away? Right. Yeah. Well, what are the critiques in the sense that you find those critiques valuable, or those are the critiques that you spent some time with? Uh-huh. They're the same things down here. No, I'm just kidding. Right. Right. Well, yeah, I found that not enough people read her also, and what I had to end up doing was just trying to get some of these casual, like a casual analysis, not some academic paper from these people that I trusted, and then that's when I started to find more stuff. But at the same time, I never found anything really that I latched onto, except for my own ideas, of course. But I did want to touch on one thing that you said, because James Valiant made this statement twice, and that was that, of course, Rand didn't consider herself a materialist in philosophical materialism in that sense, and that from the same argument you made, you could certainly understand that that she wasn't a materialist in this sense. But the way I understand the word materialism, I still don't get it. I still don't get, because when people ask me those questions, I say, I don't know that the mind can't be reduced to matter. That I don't know that thoughts aren't tied to something that we're going to end up calling matter. So in a sense, I am still a materialist. It doesn't mean that I'm not willing to explore those ideas, or not willing to say, I don't know what we're going to find out about thoughts, and about all of these things that materialism is supposed to tackle, that materialism is supposed to explain, if we're going to accept it, as an obvious condition of everything. So when people say, well, she wasn't a materialist because she still understood how the human brain worked and how thoughts were so important and how those were connected and how consciousness operates, I still don't understand how that doesn't make her a material, how that separates her from materialism, especially exclusively. Right, it is. Right. 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 But aren't these things just things we don't know? Like when people ask me those questions, and I say, well, I don't even know, that love is a thing at all. And I find that a lot with these things that we can't reduce to matter. But at the same time, if we're going to kind of think about these things or talk about them, aren't we saying that we just don't know? And aren't we saying that in the sense that we could still be materialists because we don't know at all what we're talking about in terms of what consciousness really is? What is the components of consciousness, or what is the substance of consciousness? And doesn't that leave us open to this kind of discussion about, Kant's noumenal world, even if you want to look at it that way, that if we don't know what we're talking about, we can still take our philosophy along with us. If we're materialists, we say we're going to still, the things that we do know about this world, we still know are reducible to matter, and we're going to go into these things thinking, well, it's pretty probable that we're going to end up finding something that makes it physically explainable, is what I'm saying. The omniscient. Or material is different than what we thought it was, even. Right. And I'm not a neuroscientist either. I wish I was. It really sounds interesting. Right. 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 Right.